talk aside. These gentlemen are in the bloom of youth. They possess all the activity of that interesting age, an activity which their moping old vicars would fain turn into the channel of their pastoral duties, often expressing a wish to see it expended in a diligent superintendence of the schools, and in frequent visits to the sick of their respective parishes. But the youthful Levites feel this to be dull work. They prefer lavishing their energies on a course of proceeding which, though to other eyes it appear more heavy with ennui, more cursed with monotony than the toil of the weaver at his loom, seems to yield them an unfailing supply of enjoyment and occupation. I allude to a rushing backwards and forwards amongst themselves, to and from their respective lodgings, not a round, but a triangle of visits, which they keep up all the year through, in winter, spring, summer, and autumn. Season and weather make no difference. With unintelligible zeal, they dare snow and hail, wind and rain, mire and dust, to go and dine, or drink tea, or sup with each other. What attracts them, it would be difficult to say. It is not friendship, for whenever they meet they quarrel. It is not religion, the thing is never named amongst them. Theology they may discuss occasionally, but piety never. It is not the love of eating and drinking. Each might have as good a joint and pudding, tea as potent, and toast as succulent at his own lodgings as is served to him at his brother's. Mrs. Gale, Mrs. Hogg, and Mrs. Whip, their respective landladies, affirm that it is just for naught else but to give folk trouble. By folk, the good ladies of course mean themselves, for indeed they are kept in a continual fry by this system of mutual invasion. Mr. Dunn and his guests, as I have said, are at dinner. Mrs. Gale waits on them, but a spark of the hot kitchen fire is in her eye. She considers that the privilege of inviting a friend to a meal occasionally, without additional charge, a privilege included in the terms on which she lets her lodgings, has been quite sufficiently exercised of late. The present week is yet but at Thursday, and on Monday Mr. Malone, the curate of Briarfield, came to breakfast and stayed dinner. On Tuesday, Mr. Malone and Mr. Sweeting, of Nunneley, came to tea, remained to supper, occupied the spare bed, and favoured her with their company to breakfast on Wednesday morning. Now, on Thursday, they are both here at dinner, and she is almost certain they will stay all night. C'en est trop, she would say, if she could speak French. Mr. Sweeting is mincing the slice of roast beef on his plate and complaining that it is very tough. Mr. Dunn says the beer is flat. Aye, that is the worst of it. If they would only be civil, Mrs. Gale wouldn't mind it so much. If they would only seem satisfied with what they get, she wouldn't care. But these young parsons is so high and so scornful, they set everybody beneath their fit. They treat her with less than civility, just because she doesn't keep a servant, but does the work of the house herself, as her mother did afore her. Then they're always speaking against Yorkshire ways and Yorkshire folk, and by that very token, Mrs. Gale does not believe one of them to be a real gentleman, or come of gentle kin. The old parsons is worth the whole lump of college lads. They know what belongs to good manners, and is kind to high and low. "More bread!" cries Mr. Malone, in a tone which, though prolonged but to utter 2 syllables, proclaims him at once a native of the land of shamrocks and potatoes. Mrs. Gale hates Mr. Malone more than either of the other two, but she fears him also, for he is a tall, strongly built personage with real Irish legs and arms and a face as genuinely national. Not the Milesian face, not Daniel O'Connell's style, but the high-featured North American Indian sort of visage, which belongs to a certain class of the Irish gentry, and has a petrified and proud look, better suited to the owner of an estate of slaves than to the landlord of a free peasantry. Mr. Malone's father termed himself a gentleman. He was poor and in debt and besottedly arrogant, and his son was like him. Mrs. Gale offered the loaf. "Cut it, woman!" said her guest, and the woman cut it accordingly. Had she followed her inclinations, she would have cut the parson also. Her Yorkshire soul revolted absolutely from his manner of command. The curates had good appetites, and though the beef was tough, they ate a great deal of it. They swallowed, too, a tolerable allowance of the flat beer.